The first time I reached out to Daniel, it wasn't to comfort him, it was because something about his silence pulled me in. There was a secret in the air, that evening, hidden beneath the ordinary rhythm of our home, an unspoken plea that neither of us dared to voice. A fleeting question flashed in my mind. Was I crossing a line I could never step back from? Yet even as doubt whispered, I felt my hands moving with a will of their own. And deep inside, I knew this wouldn't be the last time our paths collided in ways that would change everything. My dear friends, before I continue, did you know that nearly 90% of viewers on this channel still haven't subscribed? The lifeblood of Love and Tears is your support. We're on the journey to reach 500 subscribers, and your one click could be the reason this story and many more can come alive. So if you're watching now, let me ask, where are you tuning in from? Is it morning in your city, or are you watching this late at night, just like the quiet evening when my story began? Share with me below, because I truly want to know. Now let me bring you back to that evening. It was an ordinary Tuesday, though looking back, nothing about it was ordinary at all. The house was wrapped in a heavy kind of quiet, the kind that seems to press against the walls. Daniel had come home early from his university classes, his modest car parked neatly in the driveway, a reflection of his careful, thoughtful nature. At 21, he carried himself with a quiet strength, but in his eyes lingered a shadow of uncertainty, as though he was caught between the world of youth and the weight of adulthood. I slipped off my heels after a long day and poured myself a cool glass of water in the kitchen. My husband Richard was away on a business trip, not due back until the next morning. His absence always left the house feeling larger, emptier, every sound amplified in the silence. That night was supposed to be simple, just me, Daniel, and the quiet of a home waiting for dawn. But as I moved upstairs, the sound of running water reached my ears. The guest bathroom door was slightly ajar, and from the narrow crack spilled a stream of warm light into the hallway. I hesitated. Normally, Daniel guarded his privacy like a fortress. To see the door carelessly open was unlike him. Curiosity tugged at me, compelling me to take a step closer. Through that small opening, I saw him, his shoulders tense, leaning over the sink, as though the weight of the world rested on his back. He wasn't the confident young man everyone else saw. In that moment, he looked vulnerable, lost, almost fragile. My breath caught. Should I call his name and break the spell? Or should I walk away and leave him to whatever burden he was carrying? Before I could decide, the old floorboard beneath my feet gave a mournful creak. The creak echoed louder than it should have in that silent hallway. Daniel stiffened instantly. His reflection caught mine in the mirror above the sink, his wide eyes locking onto me. For a heartbeat, we both froze me in the hallway. Him in that narrow space of light. Emily, he said, his voice low, uncertain, like he wasn't sure if he should be angry or relieved that I was there. I swallowed, suddenly aware of how fragile the moment was. I'm sorry, Daniel, I didn't mean to intrude. I thought something was wrong. He turned slowly, and for the first time, I noticed the strain on his face. The strong young man, I knew, the one who carried himself with quiet confidence, wasn't standing before me now. Instead, I saw someone burdened weighed down by something invisible, yet heavy enough to bend his shoulders. Nothing's wrong, he muttered, though the tremor in his voice betrayed the lie. I wanted to believe him, but the vulnerability in his eyes told a different story. I took a step closer, hesitating at the doorway. Was it my place to ask, or was silence safer? These were the questions that clawed at my heart. My dear friends, watching now, let me pause here to ask you. Have you ever seen someone you care about pretend to be strong even when their heart is clearly breaking? Did you reach out or did you hold back? Tell me in the comments. I want to know your story. Back in that hallway, I realized retreating wasn't an option. Daniel, I whispered softer now, you don't have to pretend with me. Something flickered in his gaze. Then a storm of emotions he seemed too proud or too afraid to release. His lips parted, as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, he shook his head and looked away, gripping the edge of the sink so tightly that his knuckles turned white. I stood there, caught between respecting his silence and breaking it with my insistence. And that's when I knew the choice I made in that moment would set us both on a path we could never turn back from. Daniel let out a shaky breath, his back still turned toward me. For a long moment, the only sound was the steady drip of water from the faucet. Then, with a heaviness that seemed to drag the air itself down, he whispered, I can't keep holding this in anymore. I stepped inside, slowly closing the door behind me. Holding what in, I asked gently, though part of me already sensed the answer wouldn't be simple. He pressed his palms against the sink, bowing his head. Everyone thinks I'm fine. My dad, my friends at school, even you. But the truth is, I feel like I'm falling apart inside, and no one even notices. His voice cracked at the edges raw, with the pain he had tried too long to hide. I felt my chest tighten, the urge to reach out, overwhelming me. Daniel, I said softly, but the word wasn't enough. It carried every ounce of worry and tenderness I had for him. Finally, he turned to face me. His eyes were glassy, a storm threatening to break. Do you know what it's like? He asked, to smile every day, just so people won't ask questions. To keep pretending, because if they knew the truth, they'd look at you differently. I swallowed hard, unable to look away. His vulnerability pierced something deep inside me. This wasn't the composed, responsible young man everyone admired. This was Daniel, frightened, lonely, desperate for someone to simply see him. At that moment, all the walls between us seemed to crumble. I wanted to tell him he wasn't alone, that I was here, that I understood more than he realized. But I also knew words could be dangerous if I spoke them too soon. My dear friends, watching now, let me ask you, have you ever carried a secret so heavy that it kept you awake at night? If so, what did you do? Did you finally share it, or did you bury it deeper inside? Think about it, because Daniel's choice in this moment would change everything for both of us. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. I don't know how much longer I can do this. The truth trembled on his lips, and I could feel the weight of it pressing against the space between us. The air grew thick, and I knew the next words he spoke would pull us into a storm we couldn't escape. Daniel's hands trembled as he gripped the sink. His knuckles pale, the tendons in his arms strained, as if he were holding back not just words, but years of buried pain. Finally, he lifted his head, his eyes locking onto mine, with a desperation that cut straight through me. "I've been living a lie," he said, his voice raw, almost broken. "I've walked through every day pretending that I'm strong, pretending I know where I'm going. But the truth is, I feel empty. I feel like I'm disappearing piece by piece, and no one even sees it." The words landed heavy in the room, as if the walls themselves were listening. I took a step closer, my voice trembling. "Daniel, why didn't you ever tell me? Or your father?" He shook his head quickly, his jaw tight, because he wouldn't understand. He's never seen me fail, not once. To him, I'm supposed to be perfect, the dependable son, the one who never makes mistakes. If he knew how lost I feel, how much I'm drowning, he'd look at me differently. And I can't lose that. I can't lose him. A tear escaped down his cheek, then sudden and unguarded. He wiped it away, furiously ashamed, as though even showing his pain was a betrayal. I felt my own eyes sting. This wasn't the picture-perfect young man the world believed he was. This was a soul, unraveling in front of me, begging silently for someone to hold the threads together. I reached out, but stopped just short of touching him. "Daniel, listen to me. You don't have to carry this alone, not with me here." For a moment, the silence grew thick, fragile as glass. Then in a whisper that nearly broke me, he said, "I just needed someone to see me." My dear friends, if you've ever longed for that, for just one person to see past the mask you wear every day, you'll understand why this moment would forever change us both. Tell me, where are you watching this story from tonight? Is it in the quiet of your bedroom? Or maybe in a busy cafe with the world rushing by? Share it with me. I'd love to know. Because from that night forward, everything between us shifted. The boundaries blurred the air, charged with something we could no longer deny. And though I didn't yet realize it, his confession was only the beginning of a storm that would test the very core of who I was. The words "I just needed someone to see me" lingered in the air long after they left Daniel's lips. It was as though the entire house held its breath, waiting for what would come next. My heart pounded painfully in my chest, torn between the instinct to comfort him and the fear of what crossing that line might mean. "Daniel." I whispered his name, tasting fragile on my tongue. I wanted to tell him I saw him, that I always had that behind his quiet strength. I'd noticed the shadows in his eyes, the way his smile never quite reached his heart. But saying it out loud felt dangerous, too intimate. He turned toward me fully then, and in his gaze, I saw something I hadn't expected, a mixture of hope and fear, as if my reaction held the power to either save him or shatter him completely. I should have stepped back. I should have drawn the line. Instead, I found myself standing closer, pulled in by a force I couldn't name. The vulnerability in his eyes was like a tide, sweeping me off balance. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice breaking, "for not looking away." My throat tightened. How could I? In that moment, the distance between us felt like the most fragile thing in the world. My hand trembled as I reached up, almost without thinking, brushing away the tear that clung stubbornly to the corner of his eye. His breath caught at my touch, and I felt the weight of the choice pressing down on both of us. My dear friends, let me pause here and ask you, have you ever found yourself standing at the edge of a decision, knowing that once you stepped forward, nothing would ever be the same again? Did you leap, or did you turn away? Tell me in the comments, because this moment, it was my edge. The silence stretched electric, as if the world had shrunk to just the two of us in that narrow bathroom. And though no words were spoken, something unspoken bound us tightly in that fragile, breathless space. From that night, I knew whatever path we were walking, it was no longer simple. It was a road filled with fire, and I had already taken the first step into the flames. The days that followed were wrapped in a strange kind of silence. Outwardly, everything in the house looked the same: me, preparing dinner, Daniel buried in his studies, the ticking of the old clock in the hallway, echoing into the evenings. But beneath that familiar rhythm, something had shifted. Every glance we shot carried an unspoken weight. Every moment alone felt charged with a tension neither of us dared to name. It was as if that night in the bathroom had opened a door we couldn't close no matter how hard we tried. At breakfast, I would catch his eyes lingering a moment too long before he looked down at his coffee. In the evenings, when the house was quiet, I'd find myself listening for his footsteps, my heart betraying me with its restless anticipation. And yet, we said nothing. Our silence became the very language of our bond, a secret, hidden in plain sight, threading through the air between us. I told myself it was harmless, that comfort wasn't the same as danger. But late at night, lying awake in the emptiness of my husband's absence, I felt the truth pressing in. Daniel had become more than just a presence in the house. He had become the echo of something I didn't even know I was missing. One evening, as I stood in the kitchen, rinsing dishes, I felt his presence before I even turned. Daniel leaned against the doorway, his arms folded, his eyes studying me with that same quiet intensity that had haunted me since his confession. "You've been different," he said softly. I froze, my hands submerged in the cool water. Different how? He hesitated, then gave the faintest smile, one filled with sadness and something unspoken. "You see me now? And I don't know if that makes it better or harder." My dear friends, watching this, let me ask you, have you ever shared a secret look, a fleeting moment that no one else in the world could possibly understand? That silent connection can be stronger than 1,000 words. Tell me, have you ever felt it? I dried my hands slowly, my mind a whirlwind. He was right. I did see him now, and in seeing him, I was seeing myself more clearly than I had in years. And so, without ever speaking it aloud, we both knew a secret had begun to root itself between us. A fragile, dangerous bond, one that no one else could ever know. It didn't take long for the weight of our secret to press against the edges of everyday life. What had begun as fleeting glances and unspoken words started to bleed into the routines we once took for granted. At dinner, when Richard returned from his business trip, I found myself hyper-aware of every movement, Daniel sat across the table, his posture straight, his eyes carefully avoiding mine. Yet every time our gazes almost met, a tremor of recognition surged between us, an invisible thread I feared Richard might somehow notice. "Everything all right?" Richard asked, casually, glancing between us as he poured himself a glass of wine. I forced a smile. "Of course. Just a long week?" Daniel nodded, adding nothing. His silence felt louder than words, and I prayed Richard wouldn't sense the undercurrent that rippled just beneath the surface. Later that evening, as I folded laundry in the quiet of my room, there was a soft knock at the door. When I opened it, Daniel stood there, his expression unreadable. "I just wanted to say goodnight," he murmured. It was such an ordinary thing, yet the air between us was thick with everything left unsaid. I managed a faint smile. "Good night, Daniel." But as he turned to leave, his hand brushed against mine for the briefest second, a touch so fleeting it could have been accidental. Still, the spark it sent through me left my heart racing long after he walked away. My dear friends, have you ever lived with a secret so delicate that even the smallest slip could shatter it all? That's where we found ourselves, balancing between normalcy and the edge of discovery. Tell me, do you think secrets like this can ever stay hidden? Or do they always find a way to break free? From that night on, the walls of our home no longer felt like shelter. They felt like witnesses. Every word, every glance, every silence carried the weight of the forbidden bond growing between us. And deep down I knew it was only a matter of time before the fragile lines we walked would begin to blur beyond repair. It happened on a Friday evening, when the house was alive with the usual clatter of dinner being prepared. Richard was in the living room, flipping through the news on TV, while I moved between the stove and the counter. Daniel entered the kitchen quietly, his presence almost too close, too palpable. I handed him a plate of vegetables without thinking, our fingers brushing again in that unintentional, dangerous way. My breath caught, and for a split second, my eyes lifted to his. That familiar electricity surged, so powerful, so undeniable, that I forgot where we were. And then Richard's voice called from the other room, "Daniel, could you grab me a glass of water?" We both jolted, as if pulled from the edge of something reckless. Daniel snatched his hand back, his face flushing before quickly turning toward the sink. My pulse thundered in my ears as I forced myself to stir the pan, praying my trembling hands weren't obvious. When Daniel returned to the living room with the glass, I exhaled shakily, gripping the counter for support. For a terrifying moment, I was certain Richard had seen everything, that one careless glance, 1 second too long, had given us away. But the evening carried on, deceptively normal. Richard laughed at something on the news. Daniel retreated upstairs with his books. And I stood in the kitchen, my heart still racing, realizing just how thin the ice beneath us had become. My dear friends, let me pause to ask you, have you ever carried a secret so fragile that a single glance, a single slip could destroy it all? If you were me in that moment, would you step back for safety? Or would you keep walking toward the fire, knowing the danger was part of what made it burn so bright? Tell me, because I know many of you watching have lived your own hidden stories. That night when the house finally fell quiet, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I knew the truth. It wasn't a matter of if we'd be discovered. It was only a matter of when. And yet, even with fear pressing down on me, I also knew something else. I was no longer capable of turning away. The breaking point came one rainy evening. Richard had been called away unexpectedly for another business trip, leaving the house cloaked in that hollow silence I had come to know too well. Outside, the storm raged rain streaking down the windows, the thunder rolling like a warning from the heavens themselves. I was in the study pretending to read, the words on the page blurred with every beat of my restless heart. The soft creak of the floorboards pulled my gaze upward, and there he was, Daniel, standing hesitantly in the doorway. His hair was damp from the rain, his expression uncertain, as though he had been wrestling with himself before coming to me. "Can I sit?" he asked quietly. I nodded, though my breath caught. He crossed the room and lowered himself onto the chair opposite me. For a moment, we said nothing. Only the storm outside filled the silence, its rhythm echoing the storm that brewed inside us both. Finally, he spoke. "I can't keep pretending anymore, Sophia. Every day I tell myself to bury it, to act normal. But when I see you..." He broke off, his voice cracking. "When I see you, I can't lie to myself." My hands trembled against the edges of my book. "Daniel, I know it's wrong to feel this way." He rushed on, eyes glistening. "But when you look at me, when you listen to me, it feels like I'm not invisible anymore. Like someone finally sees me for who I am." Tears stung my eyes. All the walls I had built, all the reasons I gave myself to stay silent, seemed to crumble under the raw truth in his words. I wanted to deny it, to tell him this could never be. And yet, the pounding of my heart betrayed me. I whispered, barely audible, "And what if I see you too, Daniel? What then?" The room seemed to hold its breath. The thunder outside faded into the background, replaced by the sound of our ragged breathing. His gaze met mine, vulnerable, aching, and unbearably human. "My dear friends, watching now, let me ask you, what would you do in this moment? If you stood at the edge of a confession that could change everything, would you step back to safety or step forward into the unknown? Write your thoughts in the comments, because this is where our story truly begins to burn." That night, for the first time, neither of us could hide from the truth. The storm outside had found its echo within these walls, and there was no turning back. The storm outside raged long into the night, but inside that small study, the silence between us was louder than thunder. Daniel's words still echoed in my ears. "I can't keep pretending anymore." I should have walked away. I should have closed the book in my lap, stood up, and left the room before the air grew too heavy to breathe. But instead I sat, frozen, every part of me, trembling with the truth I no longer had the strength to deny. Daniel rose slowly from his chair. His steps were hesitant, almost reverent, as if he were afraid that the floor beneath him might give way. When he reached me, he paused, searching my face for a sign, for permission, for forgiveness, for something neither of us had the words for. "Say something," he whispered, his voice breaking. My throat tightened. There's nothing left to say, Daniel. We've already crossed the line in our hearts. The look in his eyes, raw, unguarded, filled with longing and fear, pulled me into a gravity I could no longer resist. And then, without another word, the distance between us collapsed. It wasn't reckless. It wasn't wild. It was slow, fragile, desperate, like two souls clinging to each other at the edge of a cliff. In that moment, the world outside ceased to exist. The storm, the house, the rules we had lived by all faded, leaving only the fire that had been building silently between us. A fire that now consumed everything in its path. My dear friends, let me pause here and ask you, have you ever felt a love, or perhaps a longing so strong that it defied reason, even morality? Did you fight it, or did you let it sweep you away? Share your heart with me in the comments, because your stories matter as much as mine. That night marked the point of no return. What had once been hidden in glances and silences had become real, undeniable, and dangerously alive. When dawn broke and the storm finally passed, the house looked the same as before. But inside, nothing was the same. We had stepped into a world where every secret glance carried risk, every moment together danced on the edge of discovery. And I knew as the morning light crept across the floor that we were no longer just keeping a secret. We were living in one. The next day, the morning sun poured through the windows as if there had never been a storm that night. But inside me, everything was different. Every step, every sound in the house was a warning. Daniel walked down the stairs, his face as calm as ever, but there was a tension in his eyes that only I could see. We didn't touch each other, didn't exchange long glances, but the truth was, they're heavier than anything. At any moment, Richard, my husband Daniel's father, could return. And if he realized anything, our whole world would collapse in an instant. "We have to be careful," I whispered, as I stood quietly beside Daniel in the kitchen, the sound of the kettle softly covering my trembling voice. He nodded his hands, clenching slightly. "Do you think I don't know?" From that moment on, every second was a battle. I looked at him, my heart both tightening and burning. Yes, it was a war. A war between reason and heart, between what was right and what was irresistible. From that day on, everything became a dangerous game. A glance exchanged in the living room when Richard was sitting right in front of me. An accidental touch when his hand passed me a glass of water. A fear lurking every time my phone vibrated, afraid that someone had known our secret. Dear friends, try to put yourself in this situation. If such a big secret was weighing on your heart, would you choose to confess, to be freed, or stay silent, to continue living in that sweet yet dangerous flame? Please share in the comments. I really want to know your thoughts. The nights that followed, I often couldn't sleep. I listened to the ticking of the clock, while my heart felt like hundreds of small knives were cutting into it. I knew I was walking on a path full of abysses. One wrong step, everything would be destroyed. But then just seeing Daniel's eyes, just hearing his deep voice calling my name, all those fears disappeared, giving way to an even stronger desire. And I wondered, was it love, or just a delusion that was leading both of us to the brink of destruction, Richard returned on a windy evening. His suitcase was placed at the door, still a little dusty from the road, but his eyes could not hide the tiredness mixed with caution. I went to greet him, my arms around my husband as usual, but my heart was pounding, as if hiding an unnamed sin. Daniel came down from upstairs, calm and slow. His eyes glanced at me, just for a moment, but I knew clearly that there were thousands of things in them that could not be put into words. Richard looked at us, a brief look, but enough to make me shiver. Maybe it was just my imagination, but I saw a flash of doubt in his eyes. "Is there anything new in the house?" he asked, his voice calm. "No, everything is the same," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. But my hands were shaking a little when I poured my husband a glass of water. In the following days, Richard became strange. He smiled less often, silently observing. Whenever Daniel and I appeared together, I could clearly feel his eyes following us, as if waiting for some opening. One time, when Daniel and I happened to be standing close together in the kitchen, just a few steps away, Richard walked in immediately. He looked at us, the corners of his lips curled slightly, and then said a simple sentence: "You two seem to be compatible." I paused, my blood freezing. Daniel was silent, his eyes looking down at the floor. Just one sentence, but it was like a thin blade, signaling that the veil of secrecy was gradually being lifted. That night I couldn't sleep. I heard Richard turning over beside me, his breathing even. But I knew he was no longer at peace. I stepped out onto the balcony, looked at the moonlight stretching across the empty street, and whispered a question that even I had no answer to. How long can we continue to lie? In the darkness, Daniel quietly opened the door, his eyes meeting mine. Without a word, I knew we were both standing on the edge of a cliff, just waiting for a small gust of wind and everything would collapse. One evening, the sky was gloomy and a light rain was falling outside the window. Richard suddenly asked the whole family to have dinner together. He rarely prepared the table himself, but that day, every plate and every glass of wine was neatly arranged. Daniel and I sat across from each other, and Richard was in the middle, his eyes silently observing every movement. The meal went on normally in silence, but that silence was so heavy that even the sound of the knife touching the fork startled me. In the middle, Richard suddenly put down his glass of wine, his eyes bored into me, then looked at Daniel. Daniel. His voice was even but colder than usual. If someone in this house did something that would destroy the family, how do you think I would react? The unexpected question made me choke. Daniel slowly looked up. His eyes met Richard, then glanced at me. In that moment, I clearly felt my heart beating as if it was about to burst. "I think," Daniel said softly, his voice hoarse, "maybe you'll choose the truth. No matter how painful it is." Richard nodded, his lips curling into a smile, but his eyes were devoid of light. He turned to me, asking softly, but like a knife, stabbing straight into my heart, "What about you, Sarah? What do you think?" I trembled. I wanted to answer, to say something, to break the suffocating atmosphere, but my throat felt blocked. I just bent down my hands, gripping the napkin on my lap, hiding my trembling. Richard didn't say anything more. He just remained silent, finished his glass of wine, then stood up and left the table. When his bedroom door closed, I realized that my whole body was drenched in sweat. Daniel was still sitting there, his hands gripping the edge of the table. His eyes red as if he was trying to suppress 1,000 emotions. Without saying it, we all understood Richard had begun his hunt for the truth. And from that moment, every word, every look, every step in this house became a life and death challenge for the feelings we were keeping secret. The following days, the atmosphere in the house was completely different. Richard became eerily silent. He no longer asked questions like before, no longer had long conversations during meals. But his eyes always followed Daniel and I's every move. One morning, when I left home for work, I caught a glimpse of Richard standing on the porch, his eyes following my car as it disappeared down the road. At that time, I didn't know that he had gone back into the house, opened the bookcase in the study, and rummaged through each of the small notebooks Daniel often wrote in. And then, in a loosely clipped page, he found the trembling lines of a young heart. I know I shouldn't, but that look captivated me. Being with her, I felt both guilty and alive. I couldn't stop. Richard was speechless. His hands trembled as he realized that each word was about me. That evening, when Daniel went down to the living room to get some water, Richard was already sitting there, alone in the dark. It was only when Daniel turned on the light that he spoke in a hoarse voice. "Daniel, do you have something to tell me?" Daniel paused, his hand tightening on the glass cup, his face changing color slightly. He tried to stay calm. "I don't understand what you mean." Richard stood up, walking closer step by step. He placed the small notebook on the table, opening it to the page with the shaky handwriting. "What about this? Are you going to let me read it and understand it myself?" The atmosphere instantly froze. Daniel took a step back, his face pale, his panicked eyes darting towards the stairs, where I was standing, frozen. I had heard everything. Richard turned his head to look at me, his eyes like a shining blade. "Do you have something to explain to me, Sarah?" At that moment, my whole world collapsed. I know there is no turning back. The living room was dead silent. Only the ticking of the clock could be heard, as if it were knocking on my chest. Richard looked at me, his eyes filled with the utmost hurt. He didn't scream, he didn't get angry. But it was his calmness that scared me the most. "Sarah, all these years I trusted you. I never thought the person I loved the most would betray me like this. I wanted to speak, wanted to say something to justify myself, but my trembling lips couldn't say anything. I felt Daniel's hand gently grasp my hand from behind as if it were a cry for help and protection. But that touch only made Richard clench his fists even tighter. He looked straight at his son. "Daniel, do you know you're destroying this family? Do you know how sinful you've just been?" Daniel, for the first time, didn't hide anymore. His voice was choked but determined. "I know, Dad, but I also know I can't stop. I love her. I don't want to hide it anymore." The confession was like a knife stabbing into Richard's heart. He staggered back, his eyes bloodshot, and I burst into tears. Love. Richard laughed a bitter laugh that made me shiver. What kind of love is built on betrayal and sin like that? Do you call that love, or is it just selfishness? Lust that obscures everything. He stepped forward, pointed straight at me. Sarah, tell me, who do you choose? Choose the husband who has been with you for so many years, or choose the lost child that you turned into a sinner? I choked tears welling up. In my heart, the love for Daniel was like a burning fire. But I also knew that in front of me was the man who had protected and loved me for a long time. Daniel squeezed my hand tighter, whispering, "Sarah, don't be afraid. If I have to leave, you're coming with me." Those words broke my heart into pieces. Both men looked at me, waiting for an answer. A decision that would not only decide my future, but the fate of all of us. I trembled, took a deep breath, and looked up at Richard with teary eyes. I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest. The air was so thick that I could hear the heavy breathing of all three of them. Richard's eyes were fixed on me, both painful and longing for a ray of salvation. Daniel's hand, that was tightly holding me, trembled slightly, as if afraid that if he let go, I would disappear forever. I closed my eyes, letting the tears flow, and said hoarsely, "Richard, I'm sorry. Maybe the love I had for you is no longer as intact as it was in the beginning. I tried to deny it, but my heart betrayed me before I betrayed you." Richard was stunned. The whole room was silent, as if even the wind outside the window had stopped blowing. I took a deep breath, then turned to Daniel. "Daniel, I choked. The words seemed to be stuck in my throat. Finally, I said through sobs, "I don't have the courage to go with you. I love you, but this love has ruined everything. You have a whole life ahead of you, and I only have the past." Daniel was startled, as if he couldn't believe his ears. His eyes were red. The hand that was holding me paused and slowly let go. "Sarah, don't say that. You don't need to sacrifice like that. You just need to choose. Choose us." His voice broke so painful that my heart clenched. I reached out to gently stroke his face tremblingly, whispering, "You deserve a complete love, without attachment, without guilt like this. Don't lock yourself in me anymore, Daniel. Live for yourself." A hot tear fell onto my hand. It was Daniel's. He turned away, his shoulders shaking. Richard stood there, his eyes filled with anger, pain, and relief. He said softly, his voice hoarse, "Thank you for at least choosing the right thing." I didn't reply. I just collapsed on the chair, sobbing. I had lost Daniel, lost Richard's trust, and lost myself. That night, the large house was filled with an unusual silence. No longer the warm silence of the past, but an overwhelming emptiness, like a deep wound that would never heal. Many years have passed since that day. I'm now a woman entering her twilight years. My hair has turned gray. My hands are no longer as soft as before. Sitting by the window of a small house in the suburbs, I often watch the sunset, letting the memories of the past come rushing back like a breeze. Richard has left me no longer by my side like before. We still lived under the same roof for many years after the incident. but there is an unbridgeable distance between us. He left in silence, taking with him the pain that I had sown. As for Daniel, he left the city shortly after that night. I once heard that he had gone to a faraway country, had a stable career, and later got married. I never saw him again, never heard that voice again. But in my heart, Daniel is still an indelible mark. A love that was both beautiful and wrong. There were nights when I dreamed that I was back on that afternoon. In my dream, I had chosen differently, holding his hand and leaving him ignoring everything. But when I woke up, there were only tears wetting my pillow and an emptiness that was hard to describe. I understood that in life, there is no room for the word if only. Every choice leaves its mark, and I chose to protect what was left, even if it meant sacrificing my heart. Now, looking back, I no longer blame myself, nor Daniel or Richard. Love can be right, can be wrong, but it is always true. And I believe that somewhere, Daniel has forgiven me. Forgiven me for loving him, but not having the courage to go with him to the end of the road. A gentle breeze blew the curtain by the door. I looked up at the dark purple sky, smiling through my tears. My heart still ached, but it was also lighter. Because I knew that at least once in my life, I had loved to the end. Dear friends, today's story ends, but the echoes must still be in everyone's heart. Love, whether right or wrong, still leaves a deep mark that time cannot erase. I really want to know if it were you. Would you choose your heart or your mind? Where are you listening to this story? A bustling city or a peaceful countryside? Please share in the comments section, because who knows, your answer might warm the heart of someone who is lost. And friends, the Love and Tears channel is on its way to reaching 500 subscribers. Your support is the motivation for me to continue bringing stories that touch the heart. If you haven't subscribed yet, please click the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any emotional journey. Thank you for staying until the end. See you in the next stories, where love, tears, and faith always go hand in hand.